If you are a sidandmartykrofft fan or heard about the Krofft's work before, then you most likely know about the Krofft's use of puppets and costumes and know about their franchise hrpufnstuf. hrpufnstuf and Freddy the Flute are easily some of the Krofft's most well-known creations, next to Sleestacks from Land of the Lost and Sigmund from Sigmund and the Sea Monsters. So it should be no surprise that in the 50 plus years that these characters have been around, that there's some very interesting history related to the costumes for Pufnstuf and the Freddy the Flute props. These costumes and props are easily recognizable and iconic, and in today's video, I'm going to be covering the history of some of the hrpufnstuf costumes and Freddy the Flute props. Before we get to the Pufnstuf we all know and love, we gotta go back in time to 1968. In 1968, Sid and Marty Krofft had a show called Kaleidoscope at the Hemisphere. And in this show, we can see the foundation of what eventually evolved into Pufnstuf. The dragon character Luther is the earliest version of the Pufnstuf character, and has quite a few differences compared to his later redesigns. The main noticeable differences is the character's lack of arms and more snowman designed body, and also the massively different color schemes, with blue and green being his main colors instead of the later yellow and green that we all are familiar with. Though despite all these differences, you can still very much see the groundwork of what eventually evolved into Pufnstuf. For example, the head design of Puff was basically unchanged from Luther aside from a color change, and a few smaller details added. Most of the design changes were related to the body, as Luther's snowman-styled body would get tweaked to the more lizard-like body that Pufnstuf has to this day. Before we move on to the costume seen in the 1969 show, we still have one more costume to cover, one that's not really talked about as much. Around March 1969, there was a press gathering to promote the upcoming premiere in Pufnstuf in fall, and alongside the original Luther costume being present, there was also this other head that looks like a mix between Luther and the final Pufnstuf design. I'm not really sure of the purpose of this head, or what it was made for, but it does closely resemble some of Pufnstuf's early concept art. Besides these few photos, we don't know much about it alongside of the other costumes and props shown off there, but I wanted to mention it because it is important to Pufnstuf's costume history. But with that, now we are moving on to the costumes used in the 1969 show. Sometime around 1968 to 1969, the Pufnstuf costumes we all know, as well as the other costume characters and props, were created and ready for use. And this is easily Puff's most iconic look, and the craftsmanship on these costumes was really good, especially for the time. Some key things to mention regarding the costumes used in the TV show is that there seem to be both multiple heads and bodies for Pufnstuf himself. Aside from the main two heads used for various scenes, there were duplicates of both heads totaling 4 known heads made for and used in the show. There is also some evidence pointing towards there being multiple bodies made for Puff as well, thanks to some behind the scenes photos. There's at least 2 Puff bodysuits, made, one with sewn on arms and another with detachable arms, most likely used whenever the performer used the puppeteering heads for Pufnstuf. The costume also either had Velcro or a zipper on the back of the costume that was well hidden on screen since it was covered by the strap with Puff's spikes on it. It's also possible that his mayor's sash was also removable, since in some scenes he seems to be lacking it. These TV show costumes would be used for several public events in the early 70s before never being seen publicly again. Next, we have the costumes used for the 1970 film adaptation of Pufnstuf. These suits are an entirely different set from the TV show, and it can be seen in the way the heads were designed and constructed, as well as the color choices. Unlike TV show Puff, who was both yellow and green, movie Puff, for the most part, was completely yellow aside from some faint green airbrushing in some areas. Movie Puff also had an entirely different mayor's badge compared to the TV show suits. Movie Puff's body construction seems to be different as well, lacking the more defined body shapes his TV show counterpart had. These costumes were also briefly used for some public events before never being seen again. In 1971, hrpufnstuf had an Ice Capade show, and with that, there were costumes made specifically for ice skating. And this version of Puff's costume is far more downscaled compared to most of the character's previous and later looks. Though this is most likely done to help aid the performer so ice skating wouldn't be so much of a nightmare. Aside from the obvious changes to help the costume be more bearable for ice skating, Puff's body is made of a more shiny fabric, and this is the first and only time this fabric was used for any version of Puff as far as I know. Now shifting away from Pufnstuf for a second, I want to talk about one of the other most recognizable characters from the show, Freddy the Flute. Now Freddy is a very interesting case because out of any of the characters, Freddy by far has the most props made for both the TV show and movie combined. We don't have an exact number of Freddys made for either the TV show or movie, but from my observation, there's easily over 10 made from what I could identify. Regarding the talking Freddy the Flutes made, there were a total of 7 made, 4 for the TV show and 3 for the movie, each with designs that are distinct from each other, mainly regarding their facial features and placement of their diamonds and holes. However, we do not have a confirmed number of static Freddys made, and it's possible that some of the static Freddys from the TV show were reused in the film, but this cannot be confirmed since Freddy in many of those shots is obscured or too far away to see. There's also a Freddy made for the Ice Capades, and this one's very distinct due to its majorly different length. This Freddy, even though there's not many images of it, is way longer than any of the other Freddy the Flute props. It's notable to mention that both the TV show and movie costumes and props were on display in a part of the Universal Studios tour in 1970, and most likely was the last publicly known place most of these sets, props, and costumes were seen. But with that, it's time to talk some of the later Pufnstuf costumes used in the 1970s and the 1980s. Now, regarding most of these costumes, there's very little to go off of since so many were made and so little about their creation is known. Starting with this version of Puff's suit, as far as I know, we don't know when exactly these public live suits were first made. The only real thing I can confirm about this version of Puff's suit is that there was quite a few of them made with several minor differences such as color differences and inconsistent quality, and that these costumes are some of the earliest live suits made for the character. These types of suits were used for various things, but most famously used in Sigmund and the Sea Monsters, the World of sidandmartykrofft at the Hollywood Bowl, and the show Chips. They were also used in the sidandmartykrofft theme park. However, the total amount of these costumes made is unknown. Next are what I'll call the Six Flags Pufnstuf costumes. There are some versions based on the live suit mentioned before, but there's some variants that are also completely original. Once again, the same as the other Pufnstuf live suits, there's not much known about these or how many were made, but it's notable that one of the Six Flags Pufnstuf costumes were used in a race with Jimmy Carter. Next, we got the costumes used in Lidsville and the Bay City Rollers. These aren't the same costumes, but since there's even less known about both of these, I figure I grouped them together. Lidsville Puff is pretty different looking compared to his movie and TV show counterparts before him, but is still very faithful to them, though his mouth in this iteration is far thinner than most versions of Puff. And in his Lidsville appearance, he's actually lacking his mayor's sash. However, in some promotional material for a Pufnstuf live show, this costume can be seen with a mayor's sash. Next is Bay City Rollers Pufnstuf, and this costume shares some aspects in common with Lidsville Puff and the first live suits for Pufnstuf. This version of Puff has very similar designed eyes to Lidsville Puff, but has a nose, hair, and body more on par with the live suit Puff. However, this version also has a few differences, such as a thicker mouth, and oddly enough, a red mayor's sash instead of his usual blue. His eyes are also spaced further apart, but aside from that, there's not much else to talk about regarding these costumes. And it's unknown if Lidsville Puff or Bay City Rollers Puff ever had multiples of them made, just like all the previous costumes. But with that, let's head to the next section of the video. 1990s to modern day! This costume of Puff was made sometime in the 90s, but I haven't been able to figure out which year it debuted. But this costume is kind of like a revision of the early Pufnstuf live suits from the 70s, though there are some major differences. The body overall isn't changed too much design-wise, but the head is completely different, and a little strange looking. Puff's hair on this suit is, like, super long. It reaches farther down his head than any of the previous other costumes. and his head shape's more round instead of wide. However, this is one of the first costumes in years since the Bay City Rollers to bring back the character's googly eyes, which was something that was changed for most of Puff's costumes throughout the 70s and 80s. This costume was used in the shows My Name is Earl and George Lopez, and appeared at the New York Toy Fair in 1999. Next costume is this one. This was used for public appearances and conventions around the late 2000s to early 2010s. And this was a huge step up compared to most of the previous costumes that were made after the TV show and movie. The body, once again, wasn't changed too much, but this one has a more refined head that closely matches the original movie and TV show costumes, and sets the groundwork for the Pufnstuf costume used in modern day. This costume is notably featured in the TV Land Sid and Marty Krofft tribute in 2009. This takes us to the most recent Pufnstuf costume at the time of this video, which is the articulated Puff. This costume was first shown off on Muttonstuf, if I'm correct, and since then, it has been the main go-to for Pufnstuf costumes to this very day. And I can't blame them, because out of any of the costumes in this video, this one gets the closest to replicating the original 1969 and 1970 costumes. And the modern animatronic head makes it way easier for Puff to interact and talk to people. This costume, however, lacks airbrush shading the original costumes had, and overall has a fairly similar body to the 90s and early 2010 Pufnstuf costumes. But this costume is easily one of Puff's best, next to his original 1969 TV show costume. And before I move on to the last section, we gotta talk about the modern Freddy the Flute puppet. For Muttonstuf, Freddy the Flute also got made a modern puppet, and it was nice seeing this character return because he wasn't really used after the TV show and movie, unlike most of the other Pufnstuf characters. However, unlike Puff, I think Freddy's modern puppet looks a little off, and some designs and color choices are odd compared to all of his previous props, such as like the silver accents rather than the lighter gold with glitter, and the facial features looking a bit small. However, this isn't a bad puppet, and looking back at it, I think I've been a little bit harsh on it in the past. It was nice seeing Freddy return on screen after so long. Now you must be wondering where most of these costumes and props ended up, and luckily I was able to get in contact with Rob Clean. I hope I pronounced that right, the vice president of sidandmartykrofft Productions, and got some insight to where many of these suits and props are nowadays, and sadly, most of them are a mystery as most of these costumes haven't been seen in decades. The original Luther costume, the TV show costume, and the movie Pufnstuf costumes, Lidsville Puff, Bay City Rollers Puff haven't been seen in decades, and it's unclear where they are nowadays, if they even still exist, period. Some of the Pufnstuf live suits from the 70s and 80s are still around, and I was told there at least were two out there. One of them was sold at the Krofft auctions back in 1998, but I'm not sure who owns it now. There's also one owned by, I don't know how to pronounce their name, but they're on Instagram, and it's a costume from the 70s that's been restored. It's unclear where the 90s Pufnstuf costume is as far as I know. The early 2010 Pufnstuf costume was on display in the Krofft offices at some point, thanks to some pictures from 2016. However, it's not clear if this costume is still on display there or not. Modern Puff is still used to this day, and was last used as recently as 2024. And I believe Modern Freddy was seen in episode 15 of Mondays with Marty. Regarding the many Freddy the Flutes, a lot of their fates are sadly unknown. It's been said Jack Wild, who played Jimmy, kept the Freddy in his possession, but ended up selling it off sometime before his death. And as far as I know, where it ended up is a mystery. One of the talking Freddys from the Pufnstuf movie is still around, and it's actually in the hands of Rob Clean to this day. This talking Freddy was also the same one from the Krofft 1998 auction. There's also images of a static Freddy online, but it's unclear where it is now, and as far as I know, most of the other Freddys have yet to resurface. It's unclear what happened to most of these costumes and props that haven't been lucky enough to resurface, and it's possible that they were all either thrown out, stolen, or sold. Hopefully someday some of these costumes and props show up again, but for now, a majority of these shall remain a mystery. Thanks for watching the video, everyone! This video was in the works for a long while now, and I'm finally glad I could get it out there. I'd also like to thank Rob Clean for being a major help with providing me information about some stuff. If you guys want to support the Krofft Company, please buy from this store. They recently released the hrpufnstuf puzzle cube, and there's still various other things in stock on their store page. I'll have it linked in the description and comments. And as always, I'll see you next time!